Yes, I know, it's good news, it's good news. A late change to the agenda. We now have a 15-minute Q&A session led by Bob, so welcome back to the stage.
Okay, so what questions did that sponsor? None, you see, you get nothing. And David was first, I'll come back to you.
Not so much a question, just you were saying about practicing and practicing and practicing. One of my favourite quote was from Fred Astaire.
Yeah.
He said he spent weeks practicing and hitting the mark 1,000 times so that when he did it on stage, it looked like the first time he was doing it.
Yeah. There is somebody mentioned practice in the interval, and there is a curve of practice, in my opinion. When you start off the curve, you're learning the words, and when you speak them, they sound learned still, because your mind is actively trying to repeat the words. When you practice it enough, you go over the hump of that curve and down the other side. And I think, in fact, funny, here's what I produced earlier. If you have these key words in your mind, then each key word will bring back almost like a paragraph of your speech. And you don't think of it as what are the words, it just comes out. Now, for me, if you take consecutive speeches, you'd find them largely the same. You would find words are different. I don't get hung up if words don't come out exactly as I want, as long as the main point is made. And that comes from the practice. And actually I learned that when I very first started with Jill. I'm not going to tell you what year that was, in North West London Speakers Club. And there was it Graham Parry? Yeah, he was an arbitration expert. He used to speak in the House of Lords. And he said what he did was he wrote his speech, he got to this bit, and he wrote it out, and then he split it into blocks. And I've always used this since, and each block became one keyword. And then he used to write the keywords with perhaps one or two key points underneath them onto index cards. And as the speech got closer, he would go into his bedroom and take the pack of cards and just throw them on the bed, pick them up at random, and as soon as he saw the keywords, start talking about that paragraph, and then jump through the speech. And he said when he could do that, then he knew he had it fixed in his mind, and he was able to go and do it in the right order. So, and that's what the practice gives you, if you do enough of it.
Thank you. I'm just looking for my policies, I'm practicing meetings.
Right.
How do you coordinate with the practice? Because you need to know what the actions are going to be.
Yeah, for certain. I use my family a lot. The bulk of the family. My wife doesn't hear me practice. She often has to go to the contest to hear what my speeches are going to be. But then, if it's important, like it was with the Humorous one, I get the family together and I ask them for feedback. It was quite important in that speech because early on, when I talked about not being technology friendly, I used the word Luddite. And my children said, "Lud what?" And I realised it was a poor word to have in because some of the audience. If we use long words, clever words, that's fine. But going back to this bit where I said you could divide the total number of words by 120 and get the number of minutes in your speech, you'll also find when you get the word count, you get the character count. And if you divide the number of characters by the number of words, you get the average number of characters per word. 4 is a reading age of about 12. 6 is postgraduate level. By the way, these are not reading tests, these are approximations, but they're pretty good. So I normally aim for just under 5. If I've got the word average character count of just under 5, I'm pretty sure that most of the audience will understand what I'm saying. As it gets higher, as it makes, you say pharmacology?
Yeah.
Yeah. You see, if you're going to have a lot of chemical names in because you're in pharmacology, it's very difficult to do that. But if you're talking to an expert audience, it perhaps doesn't matter as much. But for a general audience, I'd say under 5. The problem is, if you say a word that the audience doesn't understand, they stop and try and think what that word means. While you're carrying on speaking, they then will go back to the bit of speech it came in and see if the context makes it make any sense. And if they don't, they'll go, oh no, I'll go back to the speech. Oh, where is he? Oh, he's 2 minutes down the road and I've lost it now. So I feel it's important when you're connecting with the audience not to lose them by using
Bob, I was going to ask you about sensitivity. Recently, someone who is presenting the speech, he asked me to, I'm his mentor, and he asked me to go through it with him. He said, actually, the main question I want to ask is, he was talking about going bald, and he was talking about baldness, and he said, do you think it would be too sensitive to the audience? And I had a long think about it, and I said, no, I don't think so, because you're laughing at yourself, and I think it'll be okay. But I just wondered what your advice would be on that sort of area of sensitivity and when you're giving speech. And
right, where were they giving it?
It was actually at What for Speakers.
Right, and were they bald themselves?
Yes.
Right. I understand Alan might have other views. I think if you're talking about your own personal circumstances, and it's about your own hair loss, and you're respectful of the fact that other people may not be motivated or whatever you want by his baldness, then you should go for it. We do a lot in Toastmasters to try and make sure we're friendly. We don't talk about sex, politics, religion, but sometimes you have a message and the audience don't always like all of it.
Yeah.
But it may be an important message that you feel has to be out there. If it was me, and I knew there were some bald people in the audience who might take offence, if it was something like a Toastmasters club, I'd be inclined to ring them up and say, look, this is what I'm going to do. Would you find that offensive if you did it? If you found someone who strongly objected, then you might say, look, you know, this is a really important message to me. Will you put up with it, or perhaps will you rather not attend if I told you when it was? So I think if you do it in the spirit of cooperation, then for me that would be the way forward. Have you got a different opinion?
No, I'm just taking it.
Oh.
Actually, Alan was there, so I'm
Yeah.
glad. Do you felt okay about it, Alan?
Well, it was quite hurtful, but
I don't mean you personally, but you felt it was okay.
Okay, let's move on with that. Hang on, we've got 3 here, so I'll come to you 2 gentlemen next.
Your speech was very illuminating, and a great amount was learned from it, especially via the diagrams. However, I'd like to take a small issue and hear your comment on it. Unless I misunderstood, you actually write out verbatim your speech
I do.
and rehearse it verbatim
I do.
hundreds of times.
Yes.
Do you never feel that you get yourself bored with your own speech?
No. That's a really good question, and it's a question that comes up commonly because people say, if you're delivering the same speech time and time again, do you not get bored with it? My How to Talk to Aliens, which some of you will have heard, that must have had 30, 40 airings just at large conferences. In a conference, I would typically get somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half, depending on what sort of conference it was, to deliver that speech. The conference organiser is reliant on me to deliver that in whatever time they've asked for, because that's the way their programme goes. We were talking about the programme this evening, and the real thing I wanted from Robert was what time he wanted me to finish. Not how long was my talk, what time he wanted me to finish. Because with an organiser, quite often you'll get on the stage and the person before you may not have been as well managed as you, and they've overrun 10 minutes. You've got the slot building up to lunchtime. Everyone in the audience knows when lunchtime is coming. The organiser is scared witless that you will overrun and muck up the lunch arrangements. Once you get to the appointed lunchtime, the audience will then start to switch off because they'll think, hang on, you're missing our lunchtime now. So for me as a speaker, the key thing I need from the organiser is what time to finish. And they're relying on me to speak to time, which means that I can't just get up there and witter away. And quite often you find that if you're doing a talk that's got real progressive steps in there, it's very hard to witter away and keep to time and get all the key points out. What I would say is that almost every time you deliver it, it's different because of the audience reaction. Particularly if it's got good humour. In most of my conference talks have good humour. You get good audience reactions, you get wrapped up in it, and the fact that you've been through it before no longer counts. It doesn't count to me. It's not like standing there reciting the same words. You're interacting with the audience as you're doing.
But how would you curtail your 45-minute speech to fit into 30 minutes if it's the same speech?
Oh, well, I'd take, right, let me just talk a little bit about writing. Remember I said here that we write stuff in blocks?
Yep.
Whittle it down to blocks. I suggest that you keep those in blocks rather than as sentences or anything else. Because when someone rings up and says, oh, I want you to do a talk, they might say, refer your hat to talk to aliens, we want that. I know it was 45 minutes at this conference, we've actually only got 30 minutes. So I go through these blocks, I know how long each block is, and I say, what blocks can I block out that will take that down to 30 minutes and still keep the essence of it? And then I go and deliver those blocks and it comes in on time. One of the things that we suffer from as expert speakers, most of us will have expertise, will be invited to conferences to go and speak as an expert, is we have this huge amount of knowledge that we've built up. I've been looking at public speaking now for over 20 years. And you build up this huge amount of knowledge, and when you go out to a lay audience, not Toastmasters, but if you go out to an audience that's not involved in Toastmasters, you think, my goodness, I can't possibly do this justice unless I go through 4 hours of material that I've learned over the last 20 years. But you'd be amazed how simple you can make your talk. And the audience go away and go, wow, that's great, you know, I got really good stuff out of that. So as long as you're giving the audience things that are of good value to them, they will go away happy. You don't have to give them everything you have. Does that cover your point?
Sure.
Let's go with Alan, I think, and Mike. Oh, just gentlemen.
What's the total number of jokes in a 7-minute speech?
Total number of jokes. I'm not sure I've got a precise answer to that. But I would think you probably need the audience laughing twice a minute. It's only 14 jokes really. But try not to think of them as jokes in the terms of set up, joke. You can get a laugh with just an aside. The whole basis of the just me then, that's an aside. It's only 3 words and it gets an instant laugh. So you can fill those in very easily. You don't have to make a full joke just to get a laugh. Mike, yeah.
2 aspects. You mentioned 5 mechanisms, which we all know them individually, but you actually listen to us and give us, as it were, discipline. And I'm wondering if in fact there are only 5 or if there are actually many more. And a follow-through question, which is that as you come to recognise these mechanisms being used, does it spoil your appreciation of humour, or does it add to your appreciation?
The first thing is, I wouldn't ever claim that 5 was an exhaustive number, but I think you will find that quite a lot of them are sort of second generations from those 5. Those are the commonly thought 5, but I'm sure if you watch lots of comedians, you can see things and you think, well, that doesn't quite drop into the pan. What I think sometimes they do is they meld 2 together and it comes out as a combination and it looks very good. I would say it doesn't spoil my humour if the humour for me if the comedian is good. If I'm there laughing at what they're saying, I find I'm not thinking about what structure do they use, how did they do this, because it's funny. I find that I tend to think most about the structure and what they're doing if it ceases to be funny. And in fact, quite often I sit and I watch Live at the Apollo and I watch with Sally, and you've got a comedian on stage and he says something and you get all this laughter. And I said, what's funny about that? So he said, I didn't think it was funny. And I think there's almost like a group think in the auditorium, and it's probably held by lights that go applause, laugh or something up there, because it's a TV show. that they do something that sounds like a joke and everyone laughs. But a lot of the time, I think they just carry on and it's not funny. So in that case, I feel it does spoil it for me because I start to look at it and think, well, why are the audience laughing and I missed it? Simon.
Should a humour speech or humour generally be from your own personal experience?
I would say broadly yes. I would modify that by saying that you can often see humorous things outside your experience and you can tailor them to be in your experience. So I would say when you're talking to an audience and you're talking about humorous stuff, I think it's always got to come from you. I think it's funniest if it's about you, not, oh, I met this bloke down the pub and he met a mate who did this. I think it loses its impact. I think when you're telling the joke or the humour, I think it's got to have happened to you. And what the audience is in part laughing at is your reaction to what's happened. I was trying to think of a comedian that was a good example. And for me, probably the one that's coming immediately to mind is Sarah Millican. She talks about things which may or may not, I doubt that some of them have happened to her, but actually, if you look at it, it's a facial reaction to what's happened. So she did one about going through a barrier, the car park barriers that opened for a car, and saw her coming and opened. And it turns out it thought she was a Renault 7. But it was the look on her face, the look of horror that this barrier thought she was a car, that made it funny. Not just telling us that the barrier opened. So I think if you see things that are funny, you can adapt them and bring them into your own experience. But if you just take, say, internet humour off and reel that off as if that happened to you, that doesn't work in my opinion, because people latch on to very quickly, it's not your humour, oh, we've seen that before, heard it before. And then you lose your authenticity, and it makes the humour hard. Right, two more, I'll come back to you in a second, David.
Really, it's not to do with this precisely, but why is it that people seem to laugh at jokes that use bad language?
I find I'm quite different, because as a stand-up comic, I never use bad language. And I've got quite a name for it. In fact, somebody asked for an after-dinner speech in London. It was Dave Sutton, in fact, who organised it. They asked him for a speaker who didn't use bad language. It was for the mayor and all the chains, in the local area. And so he rang me because he thought of me. Because even in my stand-up, I don't use bad language. I don't think it is necessary. But you're right, and I don't know if people laugh at the embarrassment because of the language. I've heard it used once or twice. And the odd expletive in a stand-up set can be very funny. The person who springs to mind is Henning Ben. He uses it brilliantly, but very, very sparingly. And he uses it to demonstrate something. He's not just swearing. But you're right, the people on there swearing and getting after, I can't work out why they are. But I think we're just about on the last question. I'll take David's. What have we got, about a minute left?
Yeah, it's really on your point about when you're watching live at the Apollo, you're watching on television and the audience are laughing at something that you don't get as funny. You said something about the group reaction. And when I was younger, I went to see Norman Wisdom live on stage. He was a comedian that I'd never found funny on television, on film. But seeing him live, he was one of the most hilarious. I still remember this day was one of the most hilarious things. There was something about that live, that interaction that he had with his audience live on stage that it just transcended the whole medium.
And the good people are really good at drawing in the audience. The skill that I wanted from stand-up is if you watch someone like Dara Breed, it's a real master. When he's at the Apollo, he's walking along the audience line on the front of the stage, having what appears to me like a one-to-one conversation, but he's talking with 5,000 people. And they're all pretty much engaged in it, and all laughing. And I think that's a huge skill. So you can get lots out of these individuals. Right, I think we're going to wrap up there because the red square has just come up and the red light's gone on. But I will be around afterwards if any of you have any other questions. Thanks very much.
thank you again to Bob. That's absolutely outstanding. I mean,